So we're joined by 4 graduate students. Similarly, I tried to, get across disciplines and such, and this is not something that we had last year, and this is something we were really intentional about adding, because not only do graduate students serve our undergraduate students, but they're also in their own processes of learning. And so I often find that that perspective gets ignored or isn't acknowledged. And so I wanted to make sure to invite these folks to join us today and share their experiences. So we'll start with having y'all introduce yourselves, similarly, year, discipline, whatever else you'd like to share. And we'll start with Eichlin, who's on Zoom with us. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Ashlyn Beam. I'm a 4th year, or I guess I just finished my 4th year in the Psychological Sciences department, specifically in the area of health. And I'm here to answer some questions today.
Yeah, my name is Skala, and this is Barry. I'm an emotional support friend. I am a 3rd year QSB student, and we'll see if you guys invite us back next year after. Spilling the tea.
I'm Sherry Larson. I'm also a 3rd year QSB student. I'm in the system lab.
I am Renee. I'm just completed my 5th year in sociology. So yeah, looking forward.
So we'll start first with a question about your roles as either a teaching assistant or a teaching fellow. So can you tell us about a time when you felt seen and heard by an instructor who you worked with as a TA or TF, or alternatively, how you would like to be seen and heard by an instructor in that role? And so we'll start with Renee.
Yeah, I mean, given my years here, I've worked with a variety of IORs, and I've been an IOR myself for the Gender and Society class. Look, I've been to many workshops too, and with Eileen, and then with also Siegel as well, and I've come to learn some things and I've applied them over the years. But I guess this ending semester, I worked with a professor who who was rather new to the role too, and because we're new to teaching as well, so we kind of collaborated in that sense, applying some of the things that I suggest. So I was heard in that sense, applying some of the things that I've learned throughout the pedagogy courses and workshops and whatnot. So yeah, having those things suggested, and having the IOR actually change the syllabus around that, really, she thought that those were really good ideas, so she implemented them. So. And then with the other IORs who've been a little bit more seasoned, and the professors, they would actually, I like when I suggested I'd like to get on grading specifically, how do you want this graded, and so it was we looked over some papers, and so what they're looking for, and what to pay attention to. So I think those were, collaborative in a sense, right? Because you're kind of discussing what you're looking for and how to grade these papers, these essays. So I think those are some of the key things, at least for me. That collaboration is, for me, is really important. It felt like being heard and seen in that sense.
Thank you.
I have 2 different instances. The first one is with my own PI, which we already have an established relationship. He was very open to me saying, you've been doing this for a long time, and some of the vocabulary that you're using is not at the level of the student. So I feel like he heard that, and he invited me to stop and, excuse me, let's talk about that. And he not only encouraged that, but he invited me to do that to help the students learn. Another IOR that I worked with, when we had our meetings, we sat down, he wasn't behind a desk, we sat down like this. And we had a conversation. He asked me my opinions. I worked on rubrics, and he used it as an opportunity to mentor me as an educator, not just grade this, do this, let's do here. You know, so I felt heard, and there are times where we are asked our opinion, but we're not really heard, and like Renee said, there's not action taken. So
And obviously, we know that graduate students balance a number of roles and responsibilities. So I'd like to ask a couple of you to share how your faculty mentors and or advisors can help you as a graduate student balance and navigate your multiple roles as researcher, TA, student, and the list goes on. So we'll start with Aisling on Zoom.
Sure. So I think the best way that my advisors helped me balance all of my roles is just being understanding and kind of asking. And I think it goes along with it that I need to communicate with her. So for example, like she'll ask me, so can you get XYZ done in the next couple of weeks? And if it's middle of semester, there's not much going on, then I'll probably say, yeah, that's fine. But she's very understanding that like if it's the midterm season or the end of the semester, like I'm going to have more on my plate in terms of grading and what I'm doing in the classroom. And similarly, if I'm taking classes, I have my own finals to think about. And she's always been very understanding about that, which has been very helpful to me. But I think also another thing I was thinking of is if you are TAing for your advisor, that's something where there needs to be balance in everything you're working on with your advisor, right? So like if you're having a meeting about something to do with grades or classwork, I think what would be most helpful is if they want to talk about something else like research, they need to make that known first instead of like, let's talk about grades. Okay, also we're going to talk about like your research progress. So I think in that way, like being understanding, and if you're working on multiple things with them, being very clear like what you're working on them with in that moment, I think is what would be most helpful.
So making it to the third year, I feel like I have noticed that talking to your mentors is really quite aggravating because they'll tell you to do things with the expectation that you can just Google it, and the internet doesn't have all the answers. And that's how you go down rabbit holes as well. So I feel like the more appropriate question would be, what is the university doing to train the mentors to do the mentoring? Because how can we ask for what we need if we don't know that's what we need? And it shouldn't take like 2 days to figure out how to do a simple task. It's our first time being graduate students, so as mentors, I'm assuming you already went through the process. Sometimes just tell me what to do, sometimes, you know? And I think that would actually make it a more seamless process and open it up to being able and comfortable to ask what you need without feeling confused all the time.
And obviously, we asked this question to our undergrads too, but COVID-19 has impacted all of us in a number of ways. And so I'd like you to share what you would like your faculty members in whatever capacity you work with them to know about how your needs as a graduate student have shifted in the midst of COVID-19.
I work in a lab, and while I was working in the lab, I was considered an essential worker, so I continue to be here throughout the pandemic. And as part of that role, we were asked in a town hall or something, and there were literally, I was one of 3 students at that person, and I gave a laundry list of concerns that I had back when the pandemic started, including transportation, because I do not own a car. And I mean, California was on fire. It was unhealthy to breathe outside, and there was no place for us to eat our lunches, or I just had a laundry list of concerns that were never addressed. And as time went on, there's a little tiny piece of me that hopes that that person still comes back to me and gives me some sort of acknowledgement that I had these concerns. And not only just for basics, but it was at times where I felt like I was the only person in a building. And that kind of isolation for a person can feel very overwhelming, where then you enter a space and there's people that you don't know. And quite honestly, there are times where I did not feel safe on this campus, and I'm white. So I cannot imagine how a younger person, because people often, because of my age, assume that I'm some sort of like staff member or faculty. I cannot even begin to imagine how a younger person of color could navigate those spaces, especially somebody that has not been through the life experiences that I have and know that they can ask for help. So also, just switching gears really quick, is that graduate school, there's a big component of that where we're expected to learn by community, ask help. Hey, you don't know how to use this machine, go ask an lab member and they'll help you out. But that did not exist for us because a lot of people worked from home. A lot of our support structures were from home. So it required an email, calling, sometimes numerous calls. I had to make 3 phone calls to get mental health services from the university. And I was not in a crisis. I just knew that I needed some additional help. And it should not have taken three calls to make a mental health appointment. So I am very fortunate that my PI is very open to this. And I have told him on numerous occasions, mental health day, don't bother. And he has been very open to that, but I know that that's not something that all of my peers have access to. So I think I rambled on enough.
No, thank you. And Ashlyn?
Right, so can you repeat?
Oh, of course. Yeah,
Sorry.
so, yeah, no worries. What you would like your faculty members in whatever capacity you work with them to know about how your needs as a graduate student have shifted in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Right, so I think my advisor has been very helpful with this. I have a chronic illness, and so I was very concerned going back to campus, and I considered even taking a year off. But she was very understanding, and I think what advisors need to understand is that not everyone is young and healthy. Not everyone has the same level of immunity. And so some things that my advisor did to help me was she moved all of our meetings to be online even when we came back in person. And she adjusted our research accordingly, so I didn't have to be in person. And I'm very lucky that in my research, I'm able to do that. And I know that's not always the case, but I think what advisors need to understand and talk with their students about is what are your concerns? Like, the policies are changing constantly. They've been changing for the past 2 years. How do you feel about that? What are your concerns? Is that feasible for you and your health?
I'll wrap up with one last question on my end before we open it up to you all. And this is kind of an overarching question for all of you to answer as you'd like, which is, what does an equitable and inclusive graduate education look like for you? So, I'll start with you and then move down the line.
I answered this in kind of a stream of consciousness, so if I sound angry, I am. I've been waiting 20 years for someone to ask me this question. I'll ask everyone if they're comfortable to close your eyes and think of a loved one making a run to pick up your favorite brand of oat milk. Nice thought, isn't it? Moments later, you're receiving frantic phone calls that there's been an explosion at the same grocery store. Now open your eyes. Doesn't feel good, does it? Nah. In the anxiety you may or may not have just felt, imagine having a committee meeting in 2 hours, students to teach tomorrow, and experiments to run because your PI expects that. How the hell? How do we expect, sorry, I lost my whole thing. I'm gonna pause right there. Okay. How is academic success equitable and inclusive when it largely ignores the real world trauma that marginalized populations are living? And so it may not have been oat milk, but my uncle was hurt in an explosion running a simple errand. I've had family murdered. I've had cousins that have committed suicide because another day in a war-torn country was just too much. And what might be just headlines for some people on the news, distant, is somebody's life, right? We're always on edge. It affects your mental health. It affects your emotional well-being. And it directly impacts your academic success. Shit fucking sucks, okay? It's not great. So there's no level playing field in education when there's some students that are constantly in this phase of mourning. Like, what's the point of getting over your, what is it, your 5 stages of mourning if you're gonna start all over at an unexpected time due to how the world is right now? I do hope that the Ukraine situation is resolved, but it really makes my heart hurt because it makes me feel like the 20 years that the country that I'm from, fighting with the country that I originated from, has been largely ignored. I've had just see so much death, and there was never an acknowledgement. Any acknowledgement involving Afghanistan was about 9/11 and indirectly linking us, as the chancellor put it so nicely and eloquently, to terrorism. And that was at this school. And I remember I went to you and I really spiraled. A few weeks later, we were having the withdrawal. I'm over here waiting by the phone, asking if my cousins are gonna die today. And everyone's like, it's fine, it's over there. You're not directly impacted. But how can I not be directly impacted? And so when people say, oh my God, I support Ukraine, that makes me feel super invalidated because is it the skin color that's the difference? What's the difference? There was an invasion by this country into a country that I belong to. There's an invasion by Russia into the Ukraine. So like, what is the difference? Can someone please explain that to me? Because I've been asking myself for the last 20 fucking years of my own life. It started when I was in 3rd grade, continued into high school, continued into community college. I've had to drop classes because I could not deal with the emotional aspect of it. And there's times where you can't even address your own emotions because you're sitting there holding your mom and dad that have one had to escape because of fucking Russia, and now the US went in right after. So you're sitting there holding their hand, trying to make sure that their PTSD and their generational traumas are not spilling over to their daily life while trying to balance your own shit and then coming to school and being asked where the data is because you got to fucking run your experiments. So there's just so much to deal with. And because it's never even involved in the conversation, how can anything be equitable or inclusive? If you're trying to make things more inclusive, you're involving more diverse individuals. But given the state of the world, I'm not the only student of color that has damage to their countries of origin because of what we're doing. I love how we never fucking acknowledge the damage that we cause. Not in the past, not right now, and probably not in the future. But it has to make its way into an academic setting. It can't just be, oh, you're not part of Shaw, you can't talk about feelings. No, I want to talk about my fucking feelings in science, okay? So until these conversations don't come into an academic setting, I don't feel like we can have an inclusive and level playing field for all students, because we're basically blocking out the students that are dealing with this on a daily basis. And how is that inclusive?
I since my junior year of high school, I've had a full-time job, at least 40 hours a week. And part of that means that when I was on the 15-year plan for my undergrad. And this is the first time in my life that I've ever been able to go to college now as a grad student, because my children are fully grown, they're graduates themselves, they don't need me. So this is the first time that I've been able to be a part of the college, everything else that goes with that college experience. And I was expecting to have more of the diversity that maybe that I am not aware of, that I would love to have that as an addition to my education. And we get lots of emails, but I've never seen one that says, hey, this is what's going on in she taught me about Eid. Who knew?
Who knew?
I certainly didn't. And that's something that I could be cognizant of for my students that might be celebrating a holiday that the university is not celebrating or acknowledging. So I like to put solutions out there also, but there could be some sort of way that we can push this information out so we don't have to always trying to be pulling it to celebrate each other's differences and understand what people are concerned about, understand what their holidays are, and what might be important to them, as opposed to just my very cloistered existence with all my little white friends and getting out of this bubble. So yeah, trying to be cognizant of time because I'm a chatter.
Oh, could you repeat that?
Yeah, thinking about what an equitable or inclusive graduate education looks like.
Yeah, just echoing what these experiences were, like centering people's experiences. It's not only, I guess, with your advisor, hopefully they hear you out, but also with and I guess the seminars as well. Sometimes, we do kind of like the rose and the thorn kind of approach, but I'm sure things are more private as well. But I guess, yeah, at least academically, hopefully you'll have someone that'll work with you as far as like when deadlines are and stuff like that. Personally, I don't have any of those experiences where it's kind of damning, being just single and living my own life, kind of sheltered. I don't know, but yeah, like yeah, just hearing people out, and I think of being more flexible on some of these things could help. As I remember during the quarantine that I was going through where we're all going through the pandemic, of course, but I was taking my qualitative exams, and things were kind of like hectic too, and things were like, oh, this big back and forth. But at least, I mean, it's been up in the air that to extend our days during the test. So they did, the faculty, the department did do, at least on the second one, extend our days focusing on the text. We've got a lot of things, and that just was a permanent thing that was implemented from here on out. So for students, so yeah, I mean, there's other things that could be done, of course, but at least highlight that one as something.
And I'll wrap up with Ashlyn and then open it up for a couple questions.
So first, I just want to say it's hard going last with this question, and I agree with what all the other panelists said as well. I'll keep this short because I know we're running out of time, but I think an equitable school and environment would mean having resources for everyone because people have different needs, and even listening to what resources people might need that aren't expected. So for example, a few years ago, there was a person in my program who was working with children, and it was the pandemic. She had to adjust her research, and what she was doing was having recordings of stories to read to children and then doing a task with them. The problem was, and she came to me and told me this, was that she had a very strong accent and she was afraid that it would influence how the children perceived the story because she's working with local kids. And she didn't have resources or funding to pay for someone to read for them. So that's an example to me of like, this is an access issue. We shouldn't be, people who have who are from different countries or have stronger accents shouldn't be penalized in their research, but the funding and the resources aren't available for them to be able to do the same work that somebody who doesn't have an accent would be able to do. And she has a lot of friends, so we ended up doing it for her so that she didn't have to worry about that. But that's not always the case for everyone. So I think being able to have those resources, even when it's something that like people might not have anticipated that this would be a need.
We have time for one, maybe two questions, depending. Go ahead, Alejandro.
So I heard you all speak to a certain degree of anxiety, stress, feeling of being overwhelmed, a sort of emotional load. Can you speak, if you feel comfortable, about things you do often to address that emotional load, the techniques, practices? What is it that you actually do in the real world to address those, and how do you think the university or your advisor or whoever can help you do those particular things that you yourselves do? I know it's a sort of private, personal question. I apologize. but I'm just-
A shit ton of therapy is where I definitely start. But I think where the university can kind of step up its game is having more diverse therapists on call, because there's times where you kind of just have to make an appointment, wait because they're also short-staffed, and then you get a therapist that has no idea what the hell you're talking about. And so you kind of have to start the process over, which is a bit frustrating. As far as like academics go, I have two advisors that are white men, and I came in wanting like diverse mentors, but I've learned they're fantastic listeners. I see them biting their tongue sometimes because they're just like, they don't know what to say, but they listen, and I think that goes a long way, and they address any issues that I might experience in the lab or in class, which I think is great, because if I wouldn't know what to do if I had mentors that didn't even do that. It seems like the bare minimum, but like actively listening is really, really effective.
Medication. Also, I am fortunate enough to be able to live off of campus, so I have two of my own little beasts, and I appreciate having that time and flexibility, and my PI allows me that flexibility to do some things from home, so I can have that. I mean, they're not technically emotionally supported animals, but those guys take some stress off of me. One of the things that I do think that the university could do is that there are other creative outlets. Just recently during the grad appreciation week thing that we had, there was a painting thing, and that was so delightful. And I just loved that. There was like a little paint by numbers. I can definitely put colors into a number. I felt successful with the end result because I didn't have to come up with, some sort of art thing. It was something that I could do that was outside my realm. One thing that my PI supports is that I love microscopy, and there is no reason why I should do anything for microscopy for my my program. But he's like, here's a microscope, there's some slides, bring some stuff in, you can do it. And we don't even need a microscope in our lab, but he has one, and he appreciates that that's something that I'm excited about. So not only does he give me the tools to do it, but he's excited when I show him, hey, look at this thing. So he's encouraging for things that I find exciting, or encouraging things that are outside my purview, but that I enjoy as part of a development of my skills.
I'm gonna have to cut us off.
Sorry.
I know, no apologies. Thank you all so much. I really want to thank all of you. I acknowledged when I did contact you to be on this panel that it is difficult sometimes as a graduate student to share when the instructors who hold your career and your life in their hands are present. And so I really, really thank all of you for being here and being willing to be so open. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you for your vulnerability.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Meant a lot. It really did.
So, before I release you all for lunch, obviously putting together this graduate student panel meant a lot to me personally, being that it wasn't that long ago that I was a graduate student. And I appreciate what everyone shared. And as a graduate student, specifically as a graduate student of color, oftentimes you hesitate to share your trauma and your stories because it just feels like another story for faculty to brag about that they worked with someone who has this trauma. But being in the role that I'm in, I figured it's my opportunity to give my spiel. So I completed my graduate studies here at UC Merced a year ago, and I was able to continue working in the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion office that I started as a graduate student. And those of you who worked with me know that I'm typically the person to say, well, what about graduate students in almost every single conversation? And so this question might be coming from the fact that my time as a graduate student, like I said, was only a year ago, although arguably a year ago these days feels like 10. But there's a lot more to it than that for me than just time. Being a little scholarly for a minute, studies show that higher education is perceived as being an option for liberation for groups of marginalized backgrounds. Going all the way back to Du Bois, as recently as Cottom, Black communities look at higher education as liberation, as social mobility, as a potential way out of racial oppression. Studies show that for Latinx women, students and their mothers, they look at higher education as an opportunity for liberation from patriarchal structures. For me personally, higher education seemed like liberation in a whole lot of ways. As a Yemeni Muslim woman, I come from a family that held and maintained very traditional views about gender, one that would value family reputation over anything else. And that reputation hinged on a woman's religious piety rather than her successes. And so my decision to pursue graduate school did not sit well with a single person in my family, particularly because it meant that I would be leaving the home without a husband or a man in my family to join me. And so Merced was literally only a 2.5 hour drive, not that far. But to my family, it might as well have been a completely different world. And to me, arriving here with literally no family support, not knowing a single soul, much less having any knowledge of how the institution worked, barely really knowing how communities worked outside of my little insular Yemeni Muslim community, this felt like the most foreign experience I'd ever had. And I immigrated here very young, so I had been here for a long time. And it was the most terrifying thing I'd ever done, but it was also probably the most exhilarating time of my life as well. And for the first time in my life, it felt like the possibilities were endless until I was told that they weren't. I was told over and over and over and over again that a faculty position was the only option for me following graduate school, and that that's the only thing I should put my time towards while I was here. And when I expressed the desire to gain experiences outside of academia, because I was literally just starting my life now, so I didn't want to be locked into one position, I was told that you shouldn't waste your time with that. You should use all of your time to do research and publish, because that's fun and nice, but at the end of the day, you're going to become a faculty member, and that's what you're here to do. And so there were a long list of reasons why I questioned the faculty route. I wasn't completely turned off to it. I just wanted to see what else was out there. But also on a really pragmatic level, the possibility of not having job security for me simply was not an option. If I did not have a job or a paycheck after grad school, there was no family I could fall back on. There was not a home I could go to. So I needed a job. That was my priority, is to gain as many experiences as possible so that I could have a job when I was done here. And so I was told, like I said, at every turn, that there were no other options for me. And there were some folks that did express support, but they didn't often have the capacity to actually support me or provide me with opportunity. And so I went from feeling excited at all the possibilities in front of me to feeling like I'd made a big mistake, but I also had no place to go. So I had to stick it out. And so I was told repeatedly that the institution needed people like me to diversify the faculty, as if somehow I'd be the one to solve the leaky pipeline. And apparently the institution, the one that had created this problem of lack of diversity, needed me to fix that. But I needed me, and somehow that felt more important. And so I understand that we see, I mean, most of us here recognize the need for diversifying faculty, but the institution itself has to solve that problem. And those of us individually who've risked everything to come here can't be the solution. And arguably, I found a way to try to challenge that, just not in a faculty role. And so I'll also share that having my voice discounted at literally every turn did nothing to make that path seem any more appealing. It made me want to leave the institution as soon as possible, even though I'm still here. And so I came from a culture that did not hear women, one that expected me to live my life according to what would benefit them and confirm their worldviews, regardless of what I wanted for myself. And now this institution, the one that I thought would liberate me from that, was recreating the same exact trauma. So my voice was once again unheard, and I was expected to do what was best for the institution and to follow the template that had been laid out for many before me and many who did not look like me or share my experiences. But clearly I didn't listen to either of those templates. I have a habit of not following the templates that are set out for me and finding my own way, no matter how difficult or painful it can be. But I wish it didn't have to be that difficult and that painful. I wish the culture that was supposed to raise me up heard my desires and cultivated them. And I wish that the institution that gives so many of us the promise of progress and liberation would not have just looked at me as a tool for its own gain and benefit. So I end this whole thing to say that my journey into grad school arguably is not the norm. The majority of grad students don't enter with that exact experience, but unfortunately the experience of being unheard at every turn is way too common. And it takes shape in many ways. I lost my spot. And while I was fortunate enough to come out of it okay, in a role that I feel does all the things people wanted me to do by becoming a faculty member in many ways, it doesn't always pan out that way. And in so many ways, I stayed here out of pure desperation. But a lot of grad students arrive here and they're ready to learn from faculty whose work they've spent time studying. But, and I say this as kindly as possible, you don't know everything. And the one thing I can tell every single person that you don't know, that I know very well, is my own lived experience and my own needs and my own desires. And so when grad students tell you where they are and what they need, listen to them without having to unpack all of their trauma in front of you. And what we've heard from our student panels today, both our undergrad and our grad students, is how important it is to be seen, to be heard, and to be valued. And what you'll hear from instructors throughout the day as we go into our panels is the ways that they're trying to do that exact thing in their classroom. But the thing I always ask and push back on is, how does anti-racist pedagogy apply to graduate students? How are you as faculty members leveraging your power and your impact, if you have it, to disrupt the way that this institution oppresses and exploits graduate students? And so if your anti-racist pedagogy stops at the undergraduate level and you have the potential to expand it to the, because I know not all faculty can do that, but if you have that ability, and you choose not to, then it's not enough. So I end it with the same question that I started with, which is, what about graduate students?